Shannon Winton. Sean Morrissey Carroll is here with you as well. And Ian is going to be doing our presentation next week. Ian, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So next week we're going to be talking about speculative westerns.
And then the week after, I believe on the 25th, we're going to be talking about ways to successfully outline your book as a Ask an Editor event. That means we've been asked many questions about the process of writing, and we're here to answer them specifically about being a planner instead of a pantser. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. So I am Shannon Winton. I am a developmental editor. I've been a developmental editor for Mumble Mumble over a decade. I am also the co-founder of the Tomeworks Editing Collective, along with these two wonderful gentlemen who are here with me today. So I'm one of the organizers for the Houston Science Fiction and Fantasy Meetup. It is the oldest social group for Houston science fiction and fantasy authors. We have recently moved over to Substack for Meetup. If you're in Houston and you're interested, hopefully Sean can send you a little link to find our events. I'm also the co-coordinator for the Houston chapter of the Editorial Freelancers Association, and I teach editing science fiction and fantasy through the organization. I also am going to be teaching editing mystery, thriller, and suspense for them as well. And last but not least, I am the continuity editor for Cursed Dragon Ship Publishing here in Houston. So that's kind of my background. And one of the reasons why I think this is so fun is that there's so much we can do from the developmental side to make a book interesting. Your plot can be really pristine, but at the line level, certain things have to be inside of your book to keep readers reading. And it can be really hard to go from, I've got this really great plot, or I've got this really great idea, to I have written a great book. And one of the bridges for that is actually adding hooks to your narrative. So what are we going to focus on today? There are differences between plot and authorial voice. So we're going to explore them a little bit. How do you actually breadcrumb? What is a breadcrumb? There's some techniques for foreshadowing and adding intrigue. How do you distinguish between exposition and prose? This is kind of important for how you add your narrative hooks in. And then what is a narrative hook in the first place? Are there different types? How are they used? How do you add them to the middle of your book or the middle of a chapter? And how do you actually insert them in general into the line level? So we have like one little fun thing to do at the very end if we have time. But I have a tendency to run a little long, so let's go ahead and get into it. First things first, what is plot? Plot is the action, the actual events, the internal change, how things are interconnected from a step one, step two, step three, step four, where you're getting from your point A to your point Z inside of your book. So plot is a little different than, say, your authorial voice. This is also sometimes called narrative voice, but I don't like using that because to me, your narrative voice has more to do with POV and distance and that kind of thing. The authorial voice is the voice that you, as the author, are using, the lens that you write the story and the things that you are focusing on inside of the story. You can have a story about a person who's getting stuck in an elevator, but that story isn't really about the physical issues of being stuck in the elevator. It could be about the emotional trauma they have because they are missing their wife giving birth while they are stuck in the elevator. And the things that are occurring that are on the physical side of the plane are not the things that are the most important parts of that story. So the focus that you place inside of your story is part of your authorial voice, the tone you use, your philosophies, the emphasis or emphatics that you have inside of your details, because they're important to you as a person, or because you think they're important to your reader. And then the way the relationships are structured in some ways, how much emphasis you put on your irony, the connectivity of events, from the emotional standpoint or from your themes. So for instance, I may look at death very differently than somebody who has a different religion than me or who's in a different part of their lifespan than I am. And so the way that my experiences or my authorial voice would be in a situation where I'm writing a book about these things will be very different than somebody else's. So let's look at this plot. Sean, do you want to read this plot?
I wouldn't mind at all. I woke up. Oh my God, why are we starting there? 2, I went to work. Everybody enjoys going to work. 3, I got in a fight with my boss. Really, it's a toxic workplace. 4, I accidentally stapled my hand to a lateral report. Cue blood spewing, Three Stooges style. 5, I went to the hospital. because when I pulled the staple out, there was an arterial gushing that wouldn't stop. We're into SNL territory now, just the blood spraying everywhere. 6, the medical staff made a mistake and x-rayed my chest, where I was hurt. 7, they found a bullet lodged close to my heart, and now I need surgery. Dun, dun, dun.
The plot itself could have some intrigue, because like, what if you've never been shot, right? But this is just a bare bones plot. You're right, we often do not want to start with I woke up. But how your authorial voice will play into these different situations might look a little something like this. So, the day I met my future ex-wife started like any other. I woke up, I put on my underpants and then pants like a regular person. That's very different from just I woke up, right? Or, I go to work and sat on the L train with a lump in her stomach. She really hoped she would get through the bumpy ride downtown without some blonde woman putting their makeup on next to her and spraying her with their cologne, right? Very different. Sean, you want to read the next one?
Plot with authorial voice attached. The day I met my future ex-wife started like any other. I woke up and put on my underpants, and then pants, like a regular person. Susan sat on the L train with a lump in her stomach. She really hoped she would get through the bumpy ride downtown without some blonde woman putting their makeup next to her and spraying her with their cologne. 3, Henry's boss lunged at him. His movements were spastic and broad, and the light in his eyes was gone. Henry was formulating an apology for not calling the Synergy Company client back when he noticed the gray-red bite in his boss's arm and realized he needed to find a weapon instead.
So these are the 3 things inside of our list of actions. Sean, so, another version of adding authorial voice to plot points. I can't focus on collating these stupid copies. I cannot wait for the GRE results. 3 more days? The anxiety is killing me. My heart is fluttering in my chest. I'm pretty sure I'm dying. What will my parents do? Who will take care of my ow? I just stapled my hand to a damn report. And oh shit, there's blood. There's a lot of blood. How is there this much blood? Very different from just I stapled my hand to the report. And this last one. The American healthcare system is a fucking joke. And when Steve walked into the ER waiting room with a wad of towels wrapped around his hand and a Walmart bag duct tape around that, the permeating stench of financial ruin and fresh vomit drained his sense of individuality. And he joined the line for registration with all of the other unwell people who resigned themselves to becoming walking medical dead in this building of illness and mediocrity. Very different tones and voices and things that are being focused on inside of these different plot points. When you are looking to write your book, there's certain things that can help you when you're adding things from your authorial point of view. And these are the breadcrumbs and these are the foreshadowing. So what is a breadcrumb? Breadcrumbs are part of a mystery to be solved by the characters or by the reader. These appeal to the reader through intrigue, and when the reader has an assumption that turns out to be correct, it provides them with a dopamine boost. However, if an assumption is turned on its head and the plot is thickened as the breadcrumbs are slowly revealed, that also provides a dopamine release for your audience. So when you writing your, foreshadowing or your breadcrumbing, it's important to recognize that foreshadowing won't necessarily have an evolution aspect to it, but breadcrumbing almost always does, because this is an ongoing search for either the truth or the reveal of a mystery, even if that mystery is not part of the main plot. It may be a slow breadcrumb to things that are important for subplots. So often early breadcrumbs use intrigue and the promise of the unusual to hook the reader. Types of breadcrumbs, they are often inserted into your prose as double meanings for dialogue. Be ambiguous details that could be read in more than one way, or that just simply don't answer the question that was asked, or that focus in on something that's just a little bit odd, something that is objectively off that the reader can catch interest of. If there are details that are askew, if I say, I went to the store and that's why it took me 5 hours to get home, that doesn't necessarily align with what you would expect from somebody who's doing a quick grocery store run. So those details are askew. They may pop into the reader's mind and go, that's not quite right. but I trust the author and I have a feeling this is going to go somewhere. And that's kind of important for the process of breadcrumbing, is that you have to establish trust that you aren't just making mistakes in how you write, but that there will be a payoff. Okay, here are some breadcrumbing examples. See dead people in the Sixth Sense. Now, this particular thing is going to important for the entire plot. This is the nadir of your climax. Or you can have the slow reveal that is only a portion of the plot. So the One Ring's value and bad intent and all of the facets of it are revealed relatively early, but over the slow course of a few chapters in the very first book in The Lord of the Rings. So this is a facet of the story, not the entire story. All right, here we go. Okay, so in foreshadowing, the reader and characters are discovering, they are not discovering anything necessarily. The author intentionally uses rhetorical devices to nod to the reader that an event will occur in the book. Usually it's a drastic one, but sometimes we can foreshadow people having good things happen in their life, or that, people will get together in romantic relationships and that kind of thing. It isn't always bad. A lot of times our foreshadowing is for misfortune, though. So examples of things that can be used to help you foreshadow would be things like Chekhov's gun or the use of dramatic irony. If we see something is highlighted in a certain way, we might go, that's probably going to lead to a reversal later on. Or if there are, again, weapons on a wall, the gun on the wall, we expect to see that used somewhere. So if a detail is highlighted, most of the time audiences are primed to expect that to come back and be important, and they will deduce how it will become important. This is not the same thing as solving a mystery. There isn't really a mystery to solve. Instead, they see this as there's a relevant concept that will play out into the plot, and I can guess what that's going to be. One of the ways that I think is good to distinguish the two, I'll show you in just a minute. So foreshadowing examples, be bloody, bold, and resolute. Laugh to scorn. The power of man, for none of women born, shall harm Macbeth. Now, this is really focused on, for none of women born shall harm Macbeth. The main character thinks that means that nobody is alive that hasn't been born of a woman, so I'm invincible. But because this particular detail has been looked at so closely and becomes so important for how it's interpreted, audiences can presume he's wrong. That's foreshadowing. We're not necessarily, revealing, somebody's true origin, or that their parents abandoned them when they were younger, that their mother is actually their sister, or anything crazy like that. We know something's up with this particular facet of what this person has been told. Another good example is in The Shining. I asked if your wife fully understands what you would be taking on here. And there's your son, of course. He glanced down at the application in front of him. Daniel, your wife isn't a bit intimidated by the idea? Wendy is an extraordinary woman. And your son is also extraordinary? Jack smiled, a wide PR smile. We like to think so, I suppose. He's quite self-reliant for a 5-year-old. Now, we're not trying to figure out what being self-reliant for a 5-year-old is going to mean. It's not like I can't be like, oh, I understand self-reliance. It's that we know that self-reliance will somehow show up in the plot. So there's distinctions between foreshadowing and breadcrumbing, even though they're both ways of keeping your reader intrigued. The way I like to look at them is that these are both related to food, right? Breadcrumbing is when you were little and your mom starts pulling out ingredients to make something. So you're like, whoa, I see flour. Oh, I think I see eggs. Oh, that might be sugar. Are we making pancakes? Are we making cookies? Are we making cake? What are we making, Mom? Whereas whereas foreshadowing is the food is on the table and you were just wondering when you were allowed to eat it. So those are the big differences, in my opinion. And it's important for how you structure your planning. There are a couple of things. This is kind of a higher level concept. But if you obscure your foreshadowing or duality your foreshadowing, then you can use this to enhance your plot further. This is not just, oh, there's a reverse, but it's like the double reverse. So I have an example of a plot for a contemporary book that is about how we interrelate with other human beings. And there are things that are foreshadowed in each particular character's plot that do come around, but there is a secondary twist. Okay, so in this, there's a character named Deidre. She's trying to make healthy oatmeal raisin cookies with those healthy substitutions and secret ingredients. So this means that she's using high protein flour. Oops, flour is misspelled. Artificial sugar, coconuts, homemade mayo, etc. inside of her cookies. The author builds in foreshadowing to how her decisions are going to bomb at a dinner party because she's unable to empathize with her guests and instead is doing only what she thinks is important. When this actually turns out to bomb in her face because she cannot make actual human connection, she sends all the cookies home. The foreshadowing and focus is on how Deidre cannot pay attention to others and how she cannot make those connections. But there are details that are seeded and are foreshadowed. This will come back around. And then you have this other character, Joey. Doesn't actually know Deidre, but he has his own subplot where he gaslights his girlfriend, sabotages her relationships, and intentionally foils her attempt to secure her dream job by disrupting her online interview. She cracks and decides to kill him. She thinks about the different ways she can do this and goes through a number of them, including that she might be able to poison him because he's allergic to macadamia nuts. This is a seed for your foreshadowing. But finally decides on a complicated plan to burn his house down and make it look like a gas link. Again, dramatic irony because he's been gaslighting her. So his house does explode, but he survives because he lied about where he was. Instead, he was cheating with his paramour, Selma, who happened to have been at that first party and got those cookies. Then, after sorting out what he can do in his house, he goes to Selma's to stay because he has nowhere to live. She's doing her own nefarious thing. He's hungry, asks what kind of cookies she has, and says that he loves oatmeal raisin cookies. His mom would never let him have chocolate chip because so many people put nuts into them. And then after a few cookies, he can't breathe, and his EpiPen is gone because it burned up at his old house. He dies while the paramedics are on the way, and it's revealed the high protein flour that was used to make those cookies had almonds in them. And people who are deathly allergic to macadamia nuts and other tree nuts often have anaphylaxis to almonds too. So this was the secretly foreshadowed nadir in the story. You don't always have to have numerous levels of foreshadowing, but doing misdirection with your foreshadowing can allow you to do a 1-2 punch with the actual final climax. Giving a little bit of guidance for this. You are trying to plan your foreshadowing in breadcrumbs. You don't do that as your first step. Often, these are going to be components to the structural aspects of your book. You need to think about what your plot is. You need to think about what your subplots are. Plan foreshadowing into your outline if possible. So for instance, even though you haven't written a word of the book itself or the manuscript, you might put into your outline in chapter 3, I'm going to foreshadow plot B. And that way you can keep abreast of how often you're putting foreshadowing or breadcrumbs in to make sure that they're appropriately interspersed. The reader is not going to forget these details and that you're not overwhelming with them as well. You have subplots. You have to plan your breadcrumbs accordingly because these are tiny reveals, the actual answer to what that mystery is. So if this is an actual mystery story, like if you're writing in the genre of mystery, this may be your main plot. But generally speaking, your subplots are going to include breadcrumbs and they will show up in a final manifestation or a final reveal before the climax. Focus on being artful at the line level in your first draft. You'll not get it right, and that is okay. It's important for you to get your story down and then work on the line level details, even though these are going to be, very important to your subplots and are technically a developmental aspect of your story. But you don't want to agonize over making sure that you are getting them like word for word correct in the best way, because lots of things change. The placement inside of that chapter may necessarily change with redrafting and that kind of thing. So effort and value need to be thought about before you start working on these things. Ian, he says, but how else am I going to know if I'm a good writer if the lines aren't pretty immediate? If you are discovery writing, you will figure these things out on your subsequent draft. Your first draft probably won't have a lot of these, or you will subconsciously add certain things in, but you will still need to manifest them in other places, and you're going to need to work on them so that they, make sense in your future drafts as well. Both tactics avoid oversharing. More of the time, I see authors accidentally put too much detail in so that whenever there are final reveals for either of these things or the subplots that these are in, we already know what they are. And the payoff, that dopamine release for when we're right, doesn't really work because it is so obviated that as an audience or as a reader, I don't feel like I've actually solved anything or that I'm smart, because it's almost like saying I went to the store and I got eggs, and I'd be like, oh, you have eggs in your fridge. It's not a big enough deductive, effort on my part to really get my brain excited. But not least, always use good beta readers or alpha readers who can give you feedback on whether or not they saw, the plot twist coming, or if they already knew what the thing being foreshadowed was going to be, and if that bothered them in their read, or if it was like perfectly set up and the reveal still took them, by surprise because you managed to subvert the expectation. Let's talk a little bit about prose versus exposition. I'm kind of glad that my co-editor Anna is not here, because she will fight me on certain things. She does not believe exposition should be in the stories at all, if possible. More forgiving, because I recognize that exposition pretends to be prose when it is written well. Prose is the details that occur in the now of the story. Even if you're writing a story in past tense, or in future tense, or in present, there is always the active plot that is going on. Referring back to that previous definition, it is the events that are happening, including your immediate setting, the action, people's in the moment thoughts or reactions, the dialogue, anything that is like right now. If you think of scenes on TV, is that what is happening on the screen, essentially. Exposition is writing that contains background details that are not immediately occurring in the now. This can be like world building. This can be like backstory. This can be events that happened historically. It may inform what is going on in your in now scenes, but is not actively occurring. Narrative, all of this put together. What is a narrative hook? Narrative hook is a literary device that grabs the reader's attention. These are most often recognized when they are put at the beginning of a chapter or the end of a chapter, because they yank you in and keep you reading. But any part of your story where you may have a lot of exposition, or you may have relatively mundane plot that still needs to be in the book, you can add hooks to keep people reading because they make promises. What does not work as a hook? Cliches. It's a dark and stormy night. Nobody is going to get excited if you add relatively mundane weather. Again, it's not fun. Mundane action. It is hard to keep people's attention if you are doing something truly mundane. Paying the bills, brushing teeth, looking in the mirror. If you try to make purple prose interesting or alluring, that's probably going to end up working against you, because the overwrought or serpentine sentence structures can be difficult to follow, and a person who's already not 100% on board with reading your book may put it down. You make content confusing because you're trying to make it alluring. This also works against you. So if you have dialogue between multiple characters without attribution, we don't actually know what's going on in the scene, even if they're talking about something interesting, it may end up causing the reader like pop out of that scene. Unwarranted escalation. If a character becomes, randomly extreme or manic in their behavior without warrant or any sort of like explanation in the prose, or if events become extreme and they're not supported by the background details, these things don't work as hooks. They're not going to help you. So let's look at a first paragraph that doesn't have any hooks. Sean or Ian, would you like to read this?
I'm here for it if you want. Hopefully my audio doesn't cut out, and I hope that the last time I read it finished before it cut me off. Right. Scowl with frustration at my reflection in the mirror. Damn my hair, it just won't behave, and damn Catherine Kavanagh for being ill and subjecting me to this ordeal. I should be studying for my final exams, which are next week, yet here I am trying to brush my hair into submission. I must not sleep with it wet. I must not sleep with it wet. Reciting this mantra several times, I attempt once more to bring it under control with the brush. I roll my eyes in exasperation and gaze at the pale, brown-haired girl with blue eyes too big for her face, staring back at me, and give up. My only option is to restrain my wayward hair in a ponytail and hope I look semi-presentable.
We could maybe say that this is getting us used to this main character. Is anybody really intrigued? They want to see what happens next. Are they really hooked into this drama for somebody being sick?
It's a bit monotone for sure. It's kind of flat in its affect for sure.
Anything grab your attention in this? I'm not trying to quiz you. It does not grab my attention. And this is the very first paragraph of E.L. James's 50 Shades of Grey. Sometimes they become successful financially, or they become very well read, even though the writing is bad. You cannot bank on that. At the time, this book was one of the very few that had a lot of BDSM imagery, and it was kind of an introduction for a number of people who are not in kink circles to the ideas of the sexual content. And so it got away with a lot of bad writing because it was already popular before it was published. And because it was one of those things where if this is the only thing in the market, even if it sucks, people are going to buy it. You cannot necessarily bank on that being your success story. You have to do a good job of hooking your reader. Hooks are promises. The promises in the exposition are going to do certain things. Hooks and prose tell you, wow, this is exciting right now. But the hooks and exposition make promises that these things will be exciting throughout the story. And that is that the characters are interesting, that the setting or the world is interesting, that the situation that the characters are in is going to be interesting, and that the narrator or the person who's telling this story is going to be interesting. Had some technical issues, so I hope I am able to make this next activity work. So cross your fingers, everybody. I can share my screen. So I'm going to give us examples of books that are doing these things well. So this is The Mercy of the Gods by James Corey, and this is his very first introductory hook. To ask how many ages the Carracks have been fighting the long war, that is a meaningless question. The Carracks ruled the stars for epochs. We conquered the Aja and the Kirks and outdreamt the eyeless ones. We burned the Logothetes until their worlds were windswept glass. You wish to know of our first encounter with the enemy? But it seems more likely to me that there were many first encounters spread across the face of distance and time in ways that simultaneity cannot map. The ending, though, I saw the beginning of that catastrophe. It was the abasement of an insignificant world that called itself the Aegean. You can't imagine how powerless and weak it seemed. We brought fire, death, and chains to the Aegean. We took from it what we deemed useful to us and culled those who resisted. And that is our regret. If we had left it alone, nothing that came after would be as it has been. If we had burned it to ash and moved on as we had done to so many worlds, I would not now be telling you the chronicles of our failure. We did not see the adversary for what he was, and we brought him into our home. What do you think this is telling us? What promise does this make?
Hooky. Absolutely. Past tense, disaster has already befallen them, producing different worlds. That doesn't have to be sci-fi. It can be name dropping someone like in the last one, Catherine. You wonder who, you wonder what. There are many questions.
There is a lot of world building in here, but to me, the main hook for this is the situation, right? It is the war that is occurring, but a very good hook will convey multiple promises. And this one does convey that the world building is going to be really interesting, especially people who love world building. But it also doesn't say that the world building is going to be so overt that it's going to be like too difficult to understand. And I think I would like you to read the next one if you can see this on your screen, because I know you love this.
Oh, systems read. Yay. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me make it a little bigger. Well,
yes,
that
give me a second.
I'm going to do one thing. Just give me 2 seconds. I'm good. You can turn it back to the way it was before.
Okie dokie, artichoke.
Just gotta move that box off the screen. Become a mass murderer after I hacked my governor module, but then I realized I could access the combined feeds of entertainment channels carried on the company satellites. And it had been well over 35,000 hours or so since then, which is still not much murdering, but probably, I don't know, a little under 35,000 hours of movies, serials, books, plays, and music consumed. As a heartless killing machine, I was a terrible failure. I was also still doing my job, on a new contract and hoping Dr. Valescu and Dr. Bijuan finished their surveys soon so we could get back to the habitat, and then I could watch episode 397 of Rise and Fall of Sanctuary Moon. I admit I was distracted. It was a boring contract so far, and I was thinking about backburnering the status alert channel and trying to access music on the entertainment feed without hub system logging the extra activity. It was trickier to do in the field than it was in the habitat.
Okay, we can go ahead and pause. I know it's a lot of fun, but
Yeah,
I
you're
think
good.
we've gotten what do you see in this? What kind of hook or promise do you think this provides?
I mean, the way that murder is casual, that's just murdering. Number 35,000 is good. You're name dropping Dr. Valescu, Dr. Brajuan, but you're also name dropping Rise and Fall of Sanctuary Moon, which is much more hooky than the name of some people, as we spoke of last time with the names of the planets, or in the first one with the name of Catherine. I want to know about this. Funny thing being, as someone who has read all of the murder novels except for the new one, you still have no idea what Rise and Fall of Sanctuary Moon is. Like, it is the promise never delivered, but your mind can just make it up because it is Days of Our Lives in space. Like, you can imagine how silly it is.
I asked the wrong person this question because you love this book so much. But Ian, inside, you are correct. But at the same time, the hook itself tells me this character is interesting. As you said, I have no idea what is going on here. I do not understand the situation at all. And the details that are about the situation don't really illuminate that. However, I'm going to keep reading because what is a murder bot? Who is murder bot? What's happening with murder bot? And murder bot themselves is promised to be a really interesting character. I'm going to read this next one, and we can see if we can figure out what the main hook is for it. This is Catabasis, a fantastical descent into hell, rivalry, and redemption in the pursuit of academic glory by R.F. Kuang. I'm going to scooch a little bit into it. Bridge, Michaelmas term, October. The wind bit, the sun hid, and on the first day of class, when she ought to have been lecturing undergraduates about the dangers of using Cartesian severance spells to revise without pee breaks, Alice Law set out to rescue her advisor's soul from the 8 courts of hell. It was a terrible, gruesome accident that killed Professor Jacob Grimes, and from a certain point of view, it was her fault. And so, for reasons of both moral obligation and self-interest, without Professor Grimes, she had no committee chair, and without a committee chair, she could not defend her dissertation, graduate, or apply successfully for a tenure-track job in analytic magic. Alice found it necessary to beg for his life back from King Yama the Merciful, ruler of the underworld. I think a particular paragraph is promising. 2 things. One, the situation is wacky pants, but also the narrative voice that is being used, the narrator themselves, is giving a lot of humorous, wry kind of voice. So this is a promise that whatever's happening, this is going to be kind of a romp. This is going to be funny. Somebody else telling the story may have ended up being boring, but this narrator is somebody that I might want to kiki with, right? So this is a promise that even if things get slow, it's going to be funny, it's going to be fun, and the point of view that it's being told from is going to be enjoyable. Right, Sean, I'm going to bug you again if you can read this. Can you read the first few paragraphs of A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet
Oh,
by
yeah,
Becky
absolutely.
Chambers?
Okay. As she woke up in the pod, she remembered 3 things. First, she was traveling through open space. Second, she was
Oh,
about to
shoot.
start a
I'm
new
sorry.
job.
You know what? I apologize. This is not the one that I want you to read.
Oh, okay.
That is this part of it. I apologize.
Space was anything but quiet. Grounders never expected that. For anyone who had grown up planet-side, it's sometimes time to get used to the clicks and hums of a ship, the ever-present ambiance that came with living inside of a piece of machinery. But to Ashby, these sounds were as ordinary as his own heartbeat. He could tell when it was time to wake by the sigh of the air filter over his bed, when rocks hit the outer hull with their familiar patterning. He knew which were small enough to ignore and which meant trouble. He could tell by the amount of static crackling over the Ansible how far away he was from the person on the other end. These were the sounds of spacer life, an underscore of vulnerability and distance. They were reminders of what a fragile thing it was to be alive, but those sounds also meant safety, An absence of sound meant that the air was no longer flowing, engines no longer running, anti-grav nets no longer holding your feet to the floor. Belonged to the vacuum outside. Silence was death.
So that, what is that telling you, is going to be interesting.
Silence was death. Love that ending right there. Of what was it on the first page? Grounders is great. It puts you into it and makes this person very solid. What their personality is. That they're a no nonsense, kind of person, but putting us in an unfamiliar place. Like it's putting the reader in the place of being extremely comfortable, someplace they would not be comfortable. Everyone reading this is a grounder.
I mean, we're focusing in on these, the world or the world building or this type of lifestyle that is different from what we know and that, other characters who don't live on a ship know. So this has taken the world building and turned it into a hook. All of the things that are appealed to through that, besides that last final tiny hook where it's just like death, world building hooks. I want to see, and I know we're running a relatively towards the end of the hour, but I want to see if we can do a little practice. If people are able to see the screen, I basically want you to pretend like this content that I'm sharing with you, this relatively boring content, is something that you might add to one of your books. This description and modify it to be interesting and fun to read using a hook that highlights at least one of the following: the characters, the world, the narrator, or the situation. Feel free to add any new details, but don't turn this into prose. Don't make this active scenery. And then also share with us which genre you're writing in so we can kind of see how the hooks might relate to your readership. So the basic story, and I will give you a few examples because this could be kind of confusing, I'm sure. The basic snippet is Aliena enjoyed cold soda most days after lunch. Sipping something with a little fizz helped her stay awake as she waited for the clock to hit 5 so she could go home to her real life. Couple to kind of get you into that creative mood, to see what I am looking for you to stretch yourself to do. So Aliana enjoyed cold soda most days after lunch. When she found herself nodding off, she'd wrap her little paws around a cold glass and relish the condensation against her finger pads. The bit of fizz in the Coke tickled her snout, and even though each sip she took was usually punctuated by a series of sneezes, it rocketed her back awake, especially in the late afternoon when the clock seemed to take forever to hit quitting time. This might be something that might work for a cozy fantasy where the main character is not quite human, but might be like a little dog or a bear or what have you. And that might grab a reader's attention because it's oh so cute and it also talks about the character. A completely different example would be Aliana enjoyed cold sodas most days after lunch. Something with a little fizz helped her stay awake as she waited for the clock to hit 5. Then she would have to rush past the state-mandated torture booth at the front of the bank to get to the bustling street outside. She often fiddled with a sweating drink as she hurried so she wouldn't become distracted by the pleas for mercy that came from behind the bars and risk missing her bus. This is world building and a little bit of a situation, and this is dystopia. It's very different tones. I want you to think about how you could hook somebody in with this pretty basic sentence. We're going to take about 5 minutes and let you guys try to make your own content. So I'm going to disappear. We're going to meet back up here at 1:55 and see what you guys came up with. Just an FYI, about 1 more minute to finish this, and then we'll look at some of the examples you guys came up with. To start putting your examples into the meeting chat, that would be awesome. Okay, we're gonna stop and talk about what we wrote. One example, Andy, if you're able to unmute, do you want to read it to us, or would you like me to read it?
Can you hear me?
Go ahead and read it because it sounds really tinny and it might just be my, Zoom, but it also could be Zoom in general is not making it so we can hear you very well. I apologize, but let me go ahead and read this. Home, or the closest thing to it as the day would wind down. Lean cuisine and a movie on Netflix. Guilty pleasure, just like the brown bubbled sugar water. Her therapist mentioned rewarding herself, maybe a piece of cake once in a while, perhaps Olive Garden for dinner. For one, but that would involve leaving the comfy shuttle from workplace, home, sleep, repeat. There wasn't any rum to add to the Coke, so technically she wasn't doing anything wrong. Oh, so we learned a lot about that character in that very last little hook. Else have any that they would like to try to read?
Read mine out loud.
Please.
Okay. The top on the ice-cold Dr. Pepper. Her mind awoke before the sweet syrup even hit her tongue. Aliana felt the invisible bubbles tap her upper lip as the bottle approached her mouth, in tandem with the ship on her overhead coming into dock. For a frame more, just 3 or 4 more of these sequences, and she'd be on her way to her pod for a well-deserved rest. The bottle touched her lips and the Dr. Pepper hit her taste buds. Something odd happened. The ship tipped, shearing off the gripping arm of the port side gantry. Hear the metal in vacuum, but she could spit her soda all over the monitor and flip all the emergency switches. WTF!
That was pretty out there. I did not expect to have like so much hard world building thing. But that's a great one. Her workplace and her process is going to be a lot different because she drives a spaceship. Cool, very cool. I get to read just guys, we're running low on time. However, this I think is a really good exercise to kind of get you in the mode of how am I going to keep my reader's interest? What things can I put, at the line level, in the paragraph level to, provide that slight little dopamine buzz for between the bigger plot points. There are some things that you should avoid doing, and that when you are revising, that you should reflect when it comes to your hooks. So try to avoid accidentally implying that the world is extremely complicated, and that the reader, maybe can't understand what's happening in the story without getting a lot of backstory, or that the book isn't really starting right now because we're talking about this thing that happened in the past. And so the real story is actually this other thing over here, not the story that you're reading. To avoid trying to be a little bit too clever in how you convey things, if you're not intentionally having a smarmy narrator, you want to make sure you don't give the impression that you think you are smarter than your audience. The audience is too stupid to realize it. It can be very difficult, especially if you're trying to make your narrator interesting, not to end up having them kind of asshole territory, especially if they're supposed to be providing wry humor in their narration. So definitely that's one of those situations where if you are trying to be funny, or you are trying to use humor to bridge plot points, that you have other people look at it and make sure that you're not kind of going too far in any one direction, and that you're being moderate. Tips specifically for these, and then I apologize, we're going to be going over the hooks in the first draft. Just like the foreshadowing and your breadcrumbs, your narrative hooks or the hooks inside of your exposition are things that you will add and cultivate and curate and perfect in a later part of your editing or self-editing process. This is not something that will necessarily be the same by genre. The things that are really interesting to a reader who likes cozy mysteries probably won't be the same thing that appeals to somebody who's reading like literary fiction about life after divorce. Look for what kinds of things the other authors inside of your genre do to hook. For instance, sweet romance often has a lot of just details that are comforting or cozy, and the tactile descriptions are usually very vivid. That in itself is a hook for that kind of reader. They don't just put on a sweater. They put on a warm cashmere sweater that a beloved family member gave them, excuse me, at a very important time in their life. So everything has this like embedded meaning, joy, comfort, and support. So you're writing dystopia, it's probably not going to look the same way what your reader needs. And exposition carefully. Even if you are adding hooks, direct tell that goes on for pages is probably going to get skimmed and ignored. There are, of course, exceptions. That example from Becky Chambers actually has almost an entire chapter of exposition about world building in the past. It is so enjoyable to read that people generally don't realize that they are not reading active plot. Thing is rare, though. You should not bet on your book being that exception to the rule. Intentionally avoid cliches that don't work for your reader. There are some genre conventions that do move into cliche territory for people who don't love that genre, but people who do love that genre may expect those cliches to be in there. Always think about your reader when you revise. You may have written the first draft for you, but your last draft is for an audience. So think about what their experience is going to be like. If you need to go long periods without action, how are they going to react to that? How do you keep them interested? How do you give them those little dopamine rushes? And based upon your expectations for what they're going to want. I do appreciate everybody who was able to stay with me. I know we ran a few minutes late, but also we had a lot of technical issues that seemed to be Zoom related, and I do apologize for that. Everybody who signed up, excuse me, on Eventbrite, I will send you a recording. If for some reason the recording sucks too, because Zoom is having issues, I will re-record this so you can actually watch it for your own enjoyment and pleasure at your own leisure. If you would like to talk to an editor about how to do these things at the line level or have your book evaluated for whether you do them well, you can contact us at www.tomeworksedits.com. You can also email me at shannon@tomeworksedits.com. A whole lot of social media stuff anymore, but if you want to, you can follow me at Shannon the Editor, because I will occasionally post very fun free activities as well as some of the paid things that I teach in more formal settings. And if you're interested in watching more of these writers' lunches with other people who are not me as well, you can follow us on our Substack at substack.com at Tomeworks Edits, or specifically for things like this, tomeworksforge.substack.com. I know we ran a little bit late. I appreciate everybody being here, and I want to give a few minutes if anybody has questions, but we'll probably wrap up after one or two.
Thank you, Shannon. And I loved your points about don't worry about this on the first draft. The line level stuff is where one, like it can take some inspiration, but also it can take that, really just all my thought process working, reading out loud to yourself and seeing how the words flow. All this stuff can be fixed. I do love it when inspiration on the first draft is like, boom, I have that first sentence or that description, but it's not necessary in any way.
Sometimes you can start a book without these like gotcha hooks, and it still be fine. If they're, low beginning can work in some ways, or the world building itself, even if it doesn't present as like a boom hook, can still hook in the reader. So there are ways of doing this without being like very loud or doing fireworks kinds of hooks. And I think that is also something to recognize, is that the hooks are still there, but they're just quite subtle. And it's important to kind of recognize the tactic that you want to take when you set them up. Just as a reminder, Ian, if you're still around, you want to tell us what we're going to be talking about next week on Writer's Lunch?
Yep. We're going to be talking about speculative Westerns. So Western sci-fi, Western fantasy, Western horror, all that stuff. The ways that Westerns have influenced other genres.
If you want to watch that, or if you want to do for that event, you can find us at Eventbrite by just looking up Tomeworks. Our stuff is underneath there. Or again, you can follow us on our mailing list at tomeworksforge.substack.com, and I share out information weekly about what's coming up. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you sticking with us through the technical issues. I hope you did learn a lot, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.